Bene, grazie. Prego.
Good afternoon. Please take your seats. The meeting of this afternoon is going to deal with the following topic: from north to south, defense and peace in the world. After 1989, the key Berlin year, well, it didn't last long, a world free of wars. We had in Europe in the 90s the Balkan crisis, and then during the same decade, the first war in Iraq, and then too rapidly, we got to 2001, and we get to the ghost of terrorism on a very large scale. So our perception of the world changed, and our priorities changed, and the agendas of many societies and countries, world, like security and defense, became again very important. And so the major international bodies got attention again. And these are the bodies people referred to after the Second World War to build dialogue, to launch negotiations again, and to build a long-lasting peace. Apart from the UN, the United Nations, we have the NATO, one of the largest and most important bodies of the world that was created to deal with the new challenges. But probably today more than ever, because of all the things that have happened so far, well, we need now more than ever security. And maybe we need today more security than in the past. And how can we cope with these security needs? How can we protect our societies and democracies? And exactly today, what can we do to support these requests for defense? What is the position of the Western world? And the Western world that always considered itself at the center of the world, maybe it's not at the center any longer. It is becoming a sort of exception, almost a peripheral place, to use an expression that Pope Francis likes very much. And we are going to talk about these major topics with two extraordinary guests, not only because they're very important, but also for their friendship. First of all, Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of the NATO. This is the very first time he comes to the meeting, and he joins us. And so he's going to be part of our Hall of Fame. So the extraordinary people from all over the world who come to Rimini to visit us and who have been coming here over the past. So it's a great, great, great honor to have him here today with us. And then our minister, Mr. Alfano. Mr. Alfano has already come 10 times to our event in Rimini so we can celebrate this 10th anniversary. So 10 visits, 10 participations, so certainly a great friend of the meeting, and you came here with several, let's say, hats as a Minister of Foreign Affairs and also with other positions. But we are really happy and honored to have them here. Also, we have Secretary of State for Political Affairs, Justice and International Relations of San Marino, Mr. Nicola Renzi. Nicola Renzi, who is a mating partner, long-standing, and he's also a friend. You can really feel home here. So he will open this afternoon meeting with an opening address. So the floor is yours, Mr. Renzi. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for coming. I'm extremely grateful to the meeting. I would like to thank the president of the meeting, Mrs. Guarnieri, for inviting me and San Marino for these extremely important and successful plenary sessions. So the meeting is an extraordinary opportunity to exchange and dialogue, and it has become a very important event also for San Marino, and for the San Marino people is also a major event. Today, I would like to welcome the presence of our high-flying and reputable guests. We're going to talk about security, defense, and peace within the context of growing problems, dangers, and threats at European and international level. The voice of a small state is not weaker when it comes to urging states to promoting growing mobility to reinforce and strengthen security between and among the nations. Our republic supports the policies adopted at local, regional, and global level, and we're strongly committed to fighting against any threat undermining trust into institutions and the security of our people. We know that international terrorism is a major threat today. That's why we need to structure a specific security strategy in order to prevent threats to become real dangers and also to promote security. We know that when it comes to security and defense, we always need to favor democratic processes and protecting the rights of civilians in case of violent conflicts. We are facing global challenges today, and Europe is part of all this. That's why we have a growing number of emergencies to cope with. That's why our republic should not underscore or underestimate any violent terrorist or fundamentalist threat. We need now to face new challenges because we are facing new threats. San Marino has always been a land of dialogue and peace, and we have a multi-secular culture of liberty and freedom. We do strongly believe in the full protection of our citizens. San Marino is adopting the top international security standards and is also adopting new laws to cooperate more with other states because we strongly believe that the level of commitment does not depend on the surface of a country, but instead on the ability to understand the importance of respecting rights. Recently, we have adopted a national strategy for protection and prevention that was defined to make our country even more secure and well protected in order to guarantee more effective protection on the long run. Inevitably, we had to adopt extraordinary measures and create new units and departments. We allocated new powers to new entities, and we did that after a careful assessment of the specific security and defense needs without jeopardizing our citizens' rights. The adoption of a national defense plan needs to consider the most important international conventions. We join the most important international treaties, among which the Convention of the European Council on Cybercrime. The top pillar is protecting from cybercrime. And also, last May in Nicosia, we also signed the Convention on Cultural Goods within the fight against terrorism and organized crime. Within this context, we also want to strengthen internal and international security, and at the same time, we acknowledge the progress made by countries like the Italian Republic, great friend of us, whose better defense and security is also a better defense for us, but also recognize the important role of NATO, represented here by its Secretary General. We need peace now more than ever. We had a tragic event in Barcelona a few days ago, perpetrated by terrorists, and that reminded us once again to what extent global security is needed, and this should result from global, also cultural and political and joint actions. We need to look at the future with effective tools in order to try to educate young people, educating them to our culture, which is a culture of life. The government of San Marino is really grateful to the meeting, and I wish you a fruitful remaining event. Thank you very much, and all the best. Thank you very much indeed. And now I give the floor to Mr. Alfano, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and is a long-standing meeting friend, so we can listen to his speech on this topic we're debating here today. Good afternoon. Roberto Fontolan reminded me that this is my 10th participation in the Rimini meeting. I must confess that I didn't know that, but it's great because to me it's always like the first time. But I would like to thank Maurizio Lupi for my very first participation. I came here as member of a group working on subsidiarity, the intergroup working on subsidiarity, and that was a parliamentary committee that was created for the first time by Maurizio Lupi and Enrico Letta within the government of that time. And that experience was very important because that committee generated some laws, so there's a trace of that in our sort of law journal. It's a great honor and privilege to be here with Mr. Stoltenberg, and I'm here to talk about security and peace. Mr. Secretary General, today we talk about security, and we do that at the very same time when in Legnano the funerals of Bruno Gulotta are celebrated, one of the 3 Italian victims of the attacks in Barcelona. So we would like really to stand united to pay homage to these young men of Legnano, and together with Luca Russo, whose funerals are going to be celebrated tomorrow in Bassano. And together with a lady who was 80 years old, who had left Italy some years ago, but who still had an Italian passport. Well, did nothing wrong, but simply being in one of the most beautiful cities of Europe and the world, simply enjoying their freedom to travel, their freedom to be happy, their right to happiness, the freedom to travel around with their friends or girlfriend or family. I was in Barcelona last Sunday. I visited the place of the attacks, the La Rambla, and I saw so many flowers and candles celebrating the poor victims who were there by accident, while the murdering madness just burst out. I saw a mosaic by Miro, and I remember a beautiful sentence of the Spanish master. He used to say, Jean Miro, and the more I find life incredible, the more I try to react with an explosion of freedom. And I think that faced with what happened, the most important reaction we can have is through an explosion of freedom, so reaffirming our desire, our wish to be free, and our strength to be free. This is exactly what terrorists want. Try to scare us, to make us feel frightened, to take us our freedom, try to make us change our lifestyle, and therefore they want to make us feel not so free. On January 1st, 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, while was talking to his citizens about the State of the Union, delivered a beautiful, wonderful speech that remained in the archives of liberalism and modern democracies. Is a speech about basic freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from the need, freedom from fear. The freedom from fear is exactly about the need for security. We long for freedom, and we know that freedom is possible only if we are not scared, if you're not afraid. People in fear are not completely free. The basic key question to be answered is then, how is it so that such an eternal question can find a modern answer? Because the eternal question is the need for security, because this is something practical, but at the same time this expresses a spontaneous wish to be free. This need that is an eternal need, is an everlasting need that is enshrined in man, because men are born free and keep this wish alive all through their lives. And this wish was expressed in different ways over centuries. And man always needed somebody catering for their security. And then this need for security turned into bridges, walls, isolation, because at several times in history, men built of that to feel secure, tried to separate themselves from the rest of the world to feel safe. Today, here, we are citizens. We are citizens living a revolution, but we are not totally aware of that. One of my sons was born in 2001, the other one was born in 2006. They are digital natives. I had one of the very first computer ever created, Commodore 16 and Commodore 64. I know that the digitization is a very recent process, but that change radically something that is as old as man and as old as the man's need for security, because the digital revolution cancelled borders and frontiers. So, and this is ironic because in the era of the digital revolution, of the digitization, with no frontiers, well, somehow frontiers and borders seem to be the response to this need for security. Think about the American electoral campaign and the topic of the wall with Mexico, or think about threats coming from Austria. Let's build a wall at the Brenner, or think about some events in Hungary or other issues having to do with borders as a major topic. So European borders needed somehow to be better protected with a special agreement with Turkey. And think about the work we are carrying out on the border where it's not possible to build a wall. And I'm talking about the Mediterranean Sea that separates, international waters between Libya and us, so between Africa and us. So you see, on the one hand, we have the digitization erasing borders, and on the other hand, the need to have borders again. This is a paradox. We are trapped into this sort of contradiction, this catch-22. So this is the situation because we want to protect our freedom, the freedom we have reached and obtained. I don't want to sound too romantic, but certainly this is something we need to be aware of. And this links up with the beautiful title of this year's meeting: all that you have bequeathed you by your father, earn it in order to possess it. I'd like to link up with this beautiful quote that is this year's main meeting topic. I always felt like being sort of grateful to my father's generation and my grandfather's generation. I was born in 1970. I just knew peace. My father was born in 36 and remembers the Allies in Sicily. My grandfather went through wars, and the father of my grandfather knew wars, and also the father of the father of my grandfather knew wars, and all that. So up to my generation was born in peace, and we have known nothing but peace. So in these times of insecurity and terrorism, I think that these generations born in peace have to defend the peace, to earn and repossess what we bequeathed from our fathers in order to make it our own. So our mission is to defend freedom, because any attack to freedom has to be prevented, and our freedom is being attacked with methods that are new. And this is not any longer about wars declared by ambassadors. Those times are over. Now things are different. Our freedom is attacked by men that murder in the name of God. But we know that God is love. We know that no religion preaches hate and hatred. No religion says that to get close to God, you have to kill and murder other men. We know that those who kill and murder other men, that way is simply a way to keep God as a hostage, to justify their own deeds and crimes and victims and deaths. Security now needs new responses, because now the war is not declared by a state, by a caliphate, by men that follow a doctrine and get on the internet the terrorist kit. First of all, this is an ideological kit. This is an ideological sort of set of tools. We know that to react, a military response is not enough. We also need a military response. So we know that a cultural response is not enough, but it is indispensable, a cultural response. We know that. Just a police response is not enough, but it is absolutely irreplaceable to have a police response. We know that a law-making response is not enough, but is necessary. But most of all, what is necessary to have a coordinated response by doing all that. This is necessary, and altogether, is that going to be enough? We don't know that, because we know that zero risk is impossible. Zero risk can't be reached and achieved. Everything we're doing is simply to reduce risk at the maximum, just to provide each one of us with the awareness that we did our best to reduce risk at the maximum, but the zero risk does not exist. Dear Secretary General Stoltenberg, we have great esteem and consideration of the NATO, of the work you're doing within the NATO, and at the same time we're very proud to be Italian, because we are a great country, the second largest contributor in important missions from Afghanistan to Kosovo, and our country contributes to the military response and also has its own national response to the defense need of our citizens, because in zero risk time, so far we have been a safe country that was able to be at the same time supportive of other countries. We have saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and men and women, and we have been at the same time a safe country where Catholics can celebrate their Jubilee of Mercy, a country where after the Paris attacks of Charlie Hebdo, the national Jewish communities thanked us for the great level of security of the places of Judaism in Italy, and also the Muslim communities, to which request more and more has started reporting from the inside the subjects being radicalized and that may be a threat for our national security. So that was the result of our work. And if fruits can be acknowledged by, well, actually it's the tree that can be acknowledged by the fruit, well, if our fruits are about security, then our tree is a tree of democracy that saved human lives and was able at the same time to keep its citizens in full safety. So now we have to keep working in that respect. So we were extremely supportive to the whole world. Italy has always acted in the best possible way. So faced with these great and excellent results, I keep saying that so far the Italian response has been the best ever. And this response cannot be ignored. And that's why it's not about either or, solidarity or human rights. We were able to make rigor, solidarity, and being human all together, going hand in hand. That was a great achievement. This is the Italian achievement, and we can't forget it. We can't ignore it. We can't underestimate it and throw it away. That's why we want to underscore something very important to us. We are a country that launched a clear message, because in our constitution, the acknowledgement of the religious freedom is enshrined, because men have been praying since their origin. This is something that is natural, spontaneous. Each one of us needs to look at the stars, to pray. And this is something that it's not necessary to have granted by a state. This is a natural right to prayer, let's say, and this is expressed through an extraordinary tolerance. This tolerance, since the Treaty on Tolerance by Voltaire, is the fil rouge of liberal and democratic Western world. But at the same time, we have the right and the duty to say out loud that we are tolerant, but we cannot be tolerant with those who are not, those who do not tolerate our legal rules, to those who do not tolerate our state of rule of law, our lifestyle, and our citizens. In Italy, we were able to achieve all this, and we're extremely proud of that. That's why we do not want to forget what we have done so far, all the achievements we have reached. As a Minister for Affairs, well, I'm very happy of the choices that we made, because we decided to expel radicalized subjects, and I support the choice. However, we also need to provide a modern response to that eternal request of man for protection and security. And so today we have to react differently, because the digital revolution erased and canceled borders. So no physical border will keep us safe. That is not the right answer. The answer should come from the coordination of the measures I mentioned before, the military response, the cultural response. For instance, it is important to separate those who pray from those who shoot. Then there is the legal response, the inner security response. That is why we really consider the idea of a stronger European Union very important, and we should have a common European defense system. I've talked about this with the Secretary General of NATO. We just talked about that a few minutes ago before this meeting, and also we previously talked about that in other two previous meetings we had. Alcide de Gasperi, one of our founding fathers of the Republic, died, but he had this dream and couldn't see it. And he used to write in letters to his peers of the party the very first ideas and hypotheses of such a community to be created at the beginning of the 50s. And he said that the European architecture needed that to be solid. And he was so right. Some years ago, 6 years after that, now Europe has the opportunity to fill that gap, because Europe can't be really a strong international player without such a common European defense union. We thank the NATO for what it's doing, and the reinforcement of the European defense does not go against the NATO, not at all, but on the contrary, as complementary responses. So Europe needs to be brave enough to do more. When the US president urges us to do more in the Mediterranean, is not totally wrong. If Italy and Europe wants to get leadership again in the Mediterranean, need to invest in European defense, because in foreign policy the same rules of physics apply. We should not be surprised if we are not able to invest in the southern part of Europe. Well, then we need to do it. Otherwise, the leadership will be taken by somebody else, and maybe that somebody won't be Europe. That's why we need to be very clear. So we have Libya, we have the Middle East, we have a sea, the Mediterranean Sea. If we look at it on the world table, on the world map, you see it looks like a lake, the Mediterranean Sea, compared with major oceans, but still the Mediterranean Sea is at the center of the world is at the crossroad of the world. And I'm not talking about other key issues like migration flows, energy flows. Well, that is key. Giorgio Lapira called it as the extension of the Tiberiad Lake. So is that up to us or to protect it or to somebody else? So Tiberias Lake seems to be the origin of the sea. And we're going to have in Naples that we're going to have a key meeting on that. And NATO decided to carry out this key meeting in Naples very soon just to talk about this topic. And we thank NATO for choosing Italy as a venue for such an important international meeting. So we really need to work together, and we're going to work for that. Our choice, the Gasperi choice, is something we consider still alive because the Italian Republic always had clear ideas about joining NATO and building Europe at the same time. Those choices are still valid today, now more than ever to us. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact collapsed as well, but NATO still exists because NATO was not led by just one country. It was not a military operation. It was about a global operation carried out together jointly to give peace and stability to the world. That's why NATO still exists. So we are a generation of free men, and our major challenge is the challenge of global security. Each one of us can face it from their own standpoint by keeping one thing in mind. And I'm going to end where I started from once again in order to reaffirm our freedom. We need to reaffirm the right not to be afraid, not to be scared. We want to be free from fear. And this great need for freedom requires everybody's effort and contribution. We want to say out loud that we need to protect the freedom for which we did not die, because our fathers and grandfathers died for that. So we need to make our children citizens of a world that needs to be free from fear and safe and protected from the fanatics that want to put it in danger. Thank you. And now I want to thank our speaker and give the floor to Mr. Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, who is going to try to tell us more about these such important body, one of the largest and most important cooperation and dialogue body of the world, and try to place it within this current context. Mr. Stoltenberg has a long biography. As politician, he was twice Prime Minister of Norway, his home country. He was also Minister for several sectors, and he was also a political leader of the Norwegian Labour Party. So welcome once again to Rimini. Welcome. You are part of this Hall of Fame, this long list of international authorities, and we are always extremely honored to have you here. Thank you.
Many thanks and good afternoon, everyone. Buongiorno a tutti, or something like that. And let me start by thanking you, Chairman Roberto Fontolan, for the very nice introduction and for hosting us all here. I would also like to thank Minister Angelino Alfano for his very interesting and insightful remarks. I listened very carefully to your speech, and I really appreciate the cooperation you and I have in NATO, the personal cooperation we have, but also, of course, the close cooperation between Italy and one of our most prominent and founding members, Italy. It is also a real honor to be here at this meeting for friendship among peoples, the Rimini meeting. And this is actually my first visit to Rimini ever. I appreciate very much to attend this meeting, but I also understand that next time I have to go for holiday to Rimini. I really admire your dedication of bringing people together in the spirit of open dialogue, mutual respect, and optimism. And the world could really use a healthy dose of the Rimini spirit right now. I want also to take this opportunity to thank Italy for all its contributions to the alliance. You are the second biggest contributor to NATO operations and missions. Italian soldiers serve in our multinational battle group in Latvia. Italian jets are conducting joint air policing in Bulgaria. You also lead NATO's peacekeeping mission in Kosovo. Italian troops play a key role in the fight against terrorism, both in Afghanistan and also in Iraq. You host our Joint Force Command in Naples, including NATO's new hub for the south. And Italy is a strong voice for dialogue and diplomacy. And I really thank you for all those contributions to our shared security. Today, I want to share a few thoughts with you about the role that NATO plays in preserving peace and promoting stability. We are a defensive alliance of 29 members, united by shared values: democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. Our dedication to peace is etched into our founding treaty. A treaty, as it happens, came into effect exactly 68 years ago today, on the 24th of August 1949. So actually today we are celebrating an anniversary of NATO. For the last 68 years, the purpose of NATO has remained the same: to preserve peace. And we do this by promising to defend one another. And the core of our alliance is Article 5, our collective defense clause, which clearly states that an attack on one will be regarded as an attack on the whole alliance. All for one and one for all. This pledge has helped us to preserve peace in Europe for nearly 70 years. One of the longest periods of peace and stability in Europe's turbulent history. While our core mission to preserve the peace is unchanged, the way we carry it out depends on the security environment. And today we face the biggest security challenges in a generation. A more assertive Russia and instability in the Middle East and North Africa. Let me discuss each of these challenges in turn. First, Russia. Russia is NATO's largest neighbor. NATO does not seek confrontation with Russia. In fact, after the end of the Cold War, we worked hard to forge a strategic partnership with Russia. But Russia's aggressive behavior has undermined trust, stability, and security in Europe. In 2014, Russia illegally annexed Crimea. The first time since the Second World War that one European nation has taken territory of another by force. And Russia continues to destabilize eastern Ukraine. It is a conflict in which nearly 10,000 Ukrainians have been killed. This has dramatically changed our security environment. NATO has a two-track approach to Russia: defense and dialogue. I am a strong believer in dialogue. And last year I was granted an audience with His Holiness Pope Francis, whom I greatly admire. And I fully agree with His Holiness when he said that dialogue is what brings peace. Peace is impossible without dialogue. Therefore, NATO continues to seek a more constructive and predictable relationship with Russia to preserve peace and to create a better relation between NATO and Russia. And to encourage Russia to act within the norms and the rules of the international community. Transparency and predictability are critical, especially when tensions are high. With more military forces and more exercises along our borders, the risk of unintended incidents or accidents increases. We have to do everything we can to prevent mistakes or miscalculations from happening. And if they do happen, to make sure they don't spiral out of control. So despite our differences, we continue to engage in political dialogue with Russia. But no one should doubt the readiness and resolve of NATO to defend its allies. That is what deterrence, preserving the peace, is all about. Since 2014, the NATO alliance has significantly reinforced its collective defense. Not to provoke a conflict, but to prevent a conflict. All our measures are defensive, transparent, proportionate, and in keeping with our international obligations. The other major challenge we face comes from violent instability to the south of the alliance. Instability that has forced millions of people to flee their own countries. As you in Italy know only too well. Instability that has also bred extremism and has inspired acts of terrorism. Last week, we saw another brutal attack, this time in Barcelona. It follows similar attacks in Nice, Berlin, London, and elsewhere. These attacks use low-tech weapons, cars, trucks, and knives to devastating effect. In our free and open societies, it is very difficult to prevent every attack. We cannot just close down our cities, but we should not accept terrorism as the new normal. We should not allow our values, our free societies to be undermined. Our societies have faced the threat of terrorism before, and we have prevailed. Many of you here are too young to remember. But in the 70s and in the 80s, terrorist groups like ETA, the IRA, and the Red Brigades were responsible for far more deaths than we see today. At the time, it seemed an impossible challenge to overcome. But we did. And we can do it again. If we stand by our values, if we are resilient and determined, and if we are strong and united. Thanks to our military, police, and intelligence, there have been no more attacks of the scale and complexity of 9/11. Al-Qaeda is far from the force it once was. And ISIL has lost most of its territory in Iraq and Syria. But the threat is still there. And there is still much more to do. Together we have many tools available in the fight against terrorism. And we have to use them all. We need to fight radicalization at home. We need our police and intelligence services to investigate and protect. We need political, diplomatic and economic efforts to bring an end to conflict and to negotiate and sustain peace. And yes, we need the military to counter and defeat groups like ISIS. In this collective endeavor, NATO cannot do everything, but it has an important role to play. Tackling the root causes of terrorism and instability is not only about what we do at home, but also about what we do beyond our borders. That is why NATO remains committed to preventing Afghanistan from again becoming a safe haven for international terrorism. And why we train Iraqi officers to counter terrorism in their country. We are also increasing our support for partners across the Middle East and North Africa, with a range of different training and defense programs with partners including Tunisia and Jordan. We are now preparing to help Libya to build security institutions. And we are working with the European Union to deal with the refugee and migrant crisis in the Aegean Sea and in the Central Mediterranean, and in promoting stability in our neighborhood. Because, to put it simple, if our neighbors are more stable, we are more secure. Here NATO can play a crucial role, building on decades of experience and partnerships with more than 50 nations and organizations around the world. It is only by working together that we can make real and lasting progress towards peace. So, ladies and gentlemen, 68 years ago today, the NATO treaty came into force. Since then, NATO has worked hard to preserve peace and promote stability in Europe and beyond. Today we face the most serious security threats for a generation. But I am confident that we can prevail against all challenges, because our values are stronger. Freedom, democracy, and open societies will always prevail over hatred, violence, and intolerance. And united behind our common values, there is no threat we cannot face, and no challenge we cannot overcome. So therefore, once again, thank you for inviting me to this important platform for dialogue and peace. Thank you so much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stoltenberg, for this overview that you have illustrated, mentioning the problems as well. And by looking at this horizon, we feel that there is a great awareness of the historical values and the current values for which this organization, one of the biggest organizations in the world, is continuing its effort. Now we have just a few minutes, as I would like to add some thoughts. So I would like to go back to Minister Alfano, who emphasized very much the issue of religious freedom. In the current situation, over 75% of the world population, we have many friends who come to the meeting here and study the condition of religious freedom in the world. So over 75% of the world population live in conditions in which religious freedom is not assured. Or in many cases, there's even persecution, or they are prohibited to worship their faith. So what can we do to change this? And this figure is actually getting worse, because some years ago statistics mentioned 75%, and today our friend Braham Green, who will present tomorrow here and tomorrow, we are at 79%. Of course, there's huge differences and many different settings, but it is really a worrying piece of information. So religious freedom is one of the central issues in the current debate. What do you think? Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, there is one first idea that I have when I go to the Mass. I think that many of you go to the Mass, and sometimes we listen to the readings during the liturgy telling us about the difficulties of the first Christian communities. And then we have historical knowledge of persecution of the very first Christian communities. And also we think that we have studied history in books, or that we have listened to the readings. Well, no. It is as if we were reading some news of current affairs. This is incredible. That is, persecutions due to religion are really very common. And on top of this, some years ago, the Church, dear Secretary General of the NATO, considered a priest, Father Pino Pugliese, and this priest was considered by the Church because he was killed for being a priest. He was killed for preaching his Christian values by the mafia in Palermo, and he was proclaimed saint. So persecution is not just about what we can think of persecution of Christian communities abroad. It is something that it is inside those people who believe that the religious freedom is a kind of aggression and a kind of attack against certain interests. Now, going back to the general subject, I come from Sicily, and my origin also makes me think about this idea of persecutions against the Christians. Well, some weeks ago, in collaboration with the Vatican, I started an observatory at the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and I set up this observatory on religious minorities. Until now, I have talked about Christian communities, but we know that religious persecutions are not just against the Christians. We know that religious minorities is a fundamental issue in modern freedom. So what did I want to do? I wanted to set up this observatory. There are members that are experts to try and start an Italian automatic kind of early warning process that could let us in the foreign ministry have information from all over the world in real time about individual cases or more general cases of religious persecutions or attacks against religious freedom. All of this is going to be developed by means of a system that will be based on our diplomatic channels, and the aims that we have is to give an Italian contribution to this. Now, foreign policy in Italy, well, I am the 37th foreign ministry in Italy, but this doesn't mean that the policy in Italy, foreign policy in Italy, have changed for 37 times. There are some pillars, the pillar of the transatlantic alliance, the NATO, the faith in integration, European integration, and there's also the pillar of the Mediterranean view, and there is another pillar that is about the defense of human rights. Within this defense, I think that the issue of religious freedom and religious communities is fundamental. It is fundamental because it refers to the basis of individuals' liberty to worship his or her own God. And it really refers to a natural element that is called natural right. We have all been educated to respect the positive right, that is the right that is given to the society and regulated by different legal systems, but we also have a kind of natural right that comes before the positive right. So this is what we have to do. We have to work on this to remind all the world and in every circumstances that as Italians, we have an important role in our foreign policy to protect human rights. And so one of the fundamental rights is the right to worship. Everybody should have the right to worship his or her own God, and everybody should have the right to worship their God in their country and to respect the rules in the country where they live. In the system of international cooperation, we have the right and the power, to a certain extent, to take action to defend religious freedom. And let's remember this too, that the more we can defend religious freedom, the more the world will be secure and safe. I was talking earlier to the Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg, that at the meeting in Rimini, we refer to people even beyond their role, even if they have very important roles. So we always ask questions about individuals' experiences. So I wanted to ask you this question. You have such an important role. How do you feel in such a role with a high responsibility, which means that you should contribute to protect the destiny of the world and make it a safer place? Do you take a lot of sleeping pills? Can you sleep at night? Do you wake up happy in the morning?
I am very good at sleeping. I sleep in my bed, but I also sleep in the plane, I sleep in cars, so I know how to sleep. And I think that's a big advantage if you are working in NATO. But perhaps even more important is that I am very humbled by being at the helm of NATO. Because that's a very meaningful job. Because my main task is to every day try to help to contribute to peace. And of course I don't do that alone. NATO is an alliance of 29 different nations. We protect almost 1 billion citizens in NATO countries. And of course I have an excellent staff, people helping me every day. So I sleep and I wake up happy, knowing that we have been successful in the most important task for NATO, and that is to prevent war and preserve peace for the people living in NATO countries. And since NATO was established almost 70 years ago, we have had one of the longest periods of peace in our part of Europe. Then, of course, there are many challenges, and I mentioned many of them in my speech. The threat of terrorist attacks, instability in our neighborhood, North Africa, Middle East, Afghanistan, and so on. And we have to address that, and I work on how to address that. But I am happy, and I am confident that NATO will be able to preserve the peace for NATO allies also in the future, because we have been able to adapt and change every time the world is changing. And the last thing I will say about this is that I'm also happy because one of the great advantages of being Secretary General of NATO is that I'm invited to so many places. I meet so many nice people. For instance, I'm invited to Rimini and meet all of you. Thank you.
Bene.
Right, we have just a few minutes. I had many more questions, but I will just ask one more question. Back to Minister Alfano, I wanted to ask you a question about Russia. And we see that there is a NATO view on this respect, and there is also an Italian view in the relations with Russia. What are you working on at present? What is the country doing, Italy doing, to decrease this kind of tension and perhaps reaching a new treating a new negotiation stage with less tension? Well, thank you for this question. You have asked a kind of personal question to Secretary General of NATO, but I thought that here in this room there is a friend with us, and I'm sure that you know this person very well. And this person really plays a very important role at NATO because he's the president of the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO. He's an Italian gentleman. Italy didn't have this role for many years. It is the first time now that Italy is again in charge of this role, uniting all the parliamentary delegations of the countries of the alliance, creating a kind of parliament. And I'm talking about Mr. Paolo Valli, whom you know very well. And his role is really, really important. And I believe this is one of the most important roles fulfilled by Italian representatives at an international level. Now back to the question. I believe that as far as relations with Russia are concerned, we do play an interesting role. Our country is very close to the transatlantic dimension. We have relations with the United States of America, and a fundamental element of our policy there is part of our presence in NATO, because our identity is even more visible and strong. And in 2017, we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Alcide de Gasperi's trip to Washington, from which this transatlantic relation was established. And through which the plan for development of Europe was started, specifically the development of our country. However, we are a Mediterranean country, and we never had a view of narrow-mindedness, and we didn't want to close our view. During the Cold War, there was a big issue for energy supply. The Second World War had ended, but the Cold War was still there. At that time, we were facing the issue of how to warm Italian people's houses and how to supply energy to our country through gas pipes. During the Cold War, Italy had no worries, no preoccupations to establish commercial relations, trade relations with Russia to warm Italian people's houses with the gas coming from the Soviet Union. And for the Soviet Union, Italy turned into a very reliable client, and for us, they became very reliable energy suppliers. What is the situation now? Now we have a problem. That is, we have problems relating to Crimea, to Ukraine. How did we react? We have been loyal to the system of sanctions that a big part of the international community decided to adopt. We have been loyal to the sanctions. We complied with Europe and the international community. And we also had to bear all the consequences of these sanctions, because many international suppliers had to be replaced. But still, we defended the ideas of liberty in Crimea, and also we addressed the question of an aggression that we consider to be outside the rules of international relations. However, at the same time, we also support the idea that there should be no automatic renewal of sanctions, and that sanctions are not really the end, they are the means to go back to the rule of law at an international level in a situation where things went wrong. So that's the situation in which we are trying to insist in applying the Minsk agreement that were signed to implement a long-lasting peace and to retrieve security and the rule of law in that area. And with these agreements, when these agreements are complied, we will be the first in saying that sanctions can be lifted. But still, we had a very strong trade relations, and just like Germany and other countries did, we have these relations with Russia because it's our partner. What I can say about this is, first of all, that what we have done in terms of sanctions didn't lead Russia to have a negative reaction towards us, just excluding our country, because the Russian government has just entrusted an Italian company with a contract that is more than 4 billion euros. It is nearly 4 billion euros. On the other hand, we shouldn't forget something in the partnership between NATO and Russia. In Pratica di Mare, an agreement was reached to create the NATO-Russia Council. I think that the Pratica di Mare event has been one of the most important heritage of the Berlusconi's government, because that event that established the NATO-Russia Council started a way of having a dialogue that will function regardless of the contingent situation. So even in turbulent times, dialogue will be available there. And then, secondly, to conclude, we should not forget that Russia is part of a global alliance against international terrorism. And the sense of this participation should never be underestimated, because Russia is part of that alliance against terrorism. So trying to strike a balance in this situation is really important. I know that sometimes strong reactions may be the first reaction that comes at our availability, but good sense is also important. Now, just a few seconds to go back to Mr. Stoltenberg and close our session. I wanted to ask you this. Today, nobody has illusions. Democracy cannot be exported with conflict, with war. So I want to ask you this also as a political man. How can we then defend and disseminate democracy today? Is there a role of NATO in this respect? I ask you this because NATO is not just about defense, but it does many more things.
The core purpose of NATO is to defend all allies. But NATO is also defending some values. And in our founding treaty, it is clearly stated that our core values are freedom, individual liberties, and the rule of law. And those core values are also the core values in any democratic society. And therefore, NATO is an alliance of 29 democracies. And by having a strong NATO, we're also defending our democratic open societies. And I absolutely agree with Minister Alfano that people have to be safe to be free. And we need freedom to have real democracy. So NATO is contributing to democracy partly by defending our own countries. But we are also helping, not by force, but through cooperation, through partnership, to also build democratic institutions in other countries. For instance, when we are working in Afghanistan, we are helping them with building government institutions, fighting corruption, and also defending those democratic institutions against violence from terrorist organizations and Taliban. And for instance, when NATO was very engaged in ending ethnic wars in the Balkans in the 1990s, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, close to Italy, in Serbia, in Kosovo, that was also about helping to create peace and the foundation for democracy. So NATO's task is to defend 29 democracies, close to 1 billion people living in democratic societies. But NATO's responsibility is also to work with neighbors, with partners around the world to help them create free and democratic societies. That's good for them, but it's also good for us. Because if we have stable, free, democratic neighbors, we are also more secure. And since I'm here in Rimini at this meeting, I will also underline that part of that is, of course, also the freedom of religion. Because when NATO's founding act speaks about individual liberties, that also, of course, includes the individual liberty, the freedom to worship the God you believe in. So NATO is the alliance for freedom, for democracy, and for peace. Thank you.
Grazie. Nel salutarvi.
Thank you very much. Before saying goodbye, I want to say that you can support the meeting in several and multiple ways, also by donating. And I want to greet our Secretary of State of the Republic of San Marino. I say goodbye to our two guests. I thank them. Well, I don't know, Mr. Alfano, what are your next tasks? Because there's always a lot going on in Italy. But certainly, probably, we hope you will come next time as well. We hope Mr. Alfano will come and Mr. Stoltenberg. So you promised to come back to Rimini on holiday also. So if you come back to Rimini, you are always very welcome, and maybe you can stay more days for holiday.